Thank you very much. There is some good news. We are exactly in time with our schedule. And there is some bad news. We are exactly in time with our schedule, which means that we have no time for additional interventions from the floor. I'm sorry. But would like to get back to the podium and ask the keynote speaker and the discussions to reflect maybe on the one or other comment or answer a question. And I also would like to ask all three of you to formulate one or two recommendations for addressing persistent or emerging population issues in context of the session's themes. And as a special challenge, please do that within 3 to 4 minutes. May I start with you?
Yes,
Lydia?
of course. Thank you. I already sent my message very close to this that will I send now. And at the conference we have in September last year in Vienna, Ministerial Conference on Aging. So my main message is to invest into education. And when I say invest into education, I think about all generations, from youth to older people. Because I think that the most positive impact from investments in education and higher educated people we could have in all plans of life. They will be healthier and everything will be easier, more active, and better for the family and for themselves also. Thank you.
Thank you. Agnieszka, could you continue?
Yes, I think one message that comes from the discussions is that we should also believe that, we should also focus on policies that support intergenerational solidarity. If policies focus on one or another generation, there will be always a temptation to develop inequalities or develop differences between generations that should not happen. So I think that was very clear in many of the interventions today, that it is important to think about all the generations and think about intergenerational equity and intergenerational balance. Thank you.
And Wolfgang.
Thank you very much. There were so many interesting points raised. I just want to sort of comment on two. One, the gentleman from the Asia Forum asked about Asia being such a heterogeneous group of countries, some of them still having high fertility, others some of the lowest fertility in the world. Whether this focus on education and health is valid for all these countries at different stages in development, and the answer is a clear yes. And that's part of the strength and the beauty of this proposed population policy paradigm, as I say, because it really applies to all societies. In the context of very high fertility, it empowers the women and couples to more actively think about how many children they want, to find the means, in particular women, to find the means to reduce their family size and match their typically lower desired family size through also access to family planning, and of course the availability and the supply of contraceptives is also a necessary prerequisite there. And it enables them to be empowered on the workplace, join the workforce, and so on. And the same is true for very low fertility settings. Now, the other important point that was mentioned, and I'm sorry that in my speech I didn't really have the time as I had planned, because I was spending too much time in the first part of my presentation, as you've seen, is about population and climate change and environment in general. Actually, I should today not be sitting here, but be in Addis Ababa, where there's the lead authors conference of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change, where I'm lead author of the section, the chapter on sustainable development. But I had promised earlier to be here, so I hope they don't kick me out of the IPCC because it's obligatory to be there. In any case, it is a very, very difficult contradiction that you also found out in the whole context of Rio plus 20 recently, to at the same time pursue development and poverty eradication and limit greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 emissions, because there is an inbuilt contradiction, because as people come out of poverty, what we all hope, they will inevitably earn more and consume more, and given our current technology, they will also cause more greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, there's this hope of green economy or green growth, but this is based on future technologies that are not yet around. Now, in this context, again, there is sort of, it's not a silver bullet. I mean, we all know that there is no silver bullet in development and in anything, but I think that this combination of basic health and basic broad-based education, in particular of women, comes as close to a silver bullet as anything in international development can come to it. It really, first of all, enhances the ability, as I said, the empowerment of women to assure their own rights. And this rights-based approach, really, that has been stressed this afternoon again, needs to be the very basis. But how are rights assured in practice best to empower people to look after their rights and ensure it themselves, as well as influencing politics, of course, and governance to make sure that these rights are not being violated. The second, as I had mentioned, of course, the education and health are really increasingly known to be the single most important strategy to bringing families, people, men and women, children out of poverty. I mean, there are all these successful anti-poverty programs in Brazil or Mexico, and they're increasingly tested in some African settings as well. Really, they're always focused on basic health and basic education. And these are the ones that seem to work. And then, of course, with respect to the environment, there is no doubt at all that more empowered, more educated, and therefore often also wealthier people are better able to adapt to future climate change, to changing environmental conditions that are already unavoidable, be it tropical storms, be it sea level rise, be it droughts. Always people who have the more information, who have the more forward-looking attitude, and who have the means to take precautions are less vulnerable. And the last and possibly most difficult is, what about the mitigative capacity, reducing CO2 emissions? And even there, at a given level of income, there's evidence that the better educated people more quickly switch over to clean technologies. They more quickly are ready to change their lifestyles. There's an interesting study that at a given level of income, for instance, in Italian towns, the more educated are more ready to switch from private cars to public transportation than the less educated are. So there is also, even on this most difficult contradiction of education makes you richer, that's what everybody wants to be, and therefore you consume more. There's also some hope that education can be a way out of this. But this is clearly the most difficult. So I'm just putting this on the table. It's a very complex issue, but I'm glad that finally sort of the priority discussion in the development community, in the IPCC community, as well as in the population community, seems to be converging.
Thank you. And may I now ask our rapporteur, Professor John Hobcraft, to do his nearly impossible job and summarize this session.
I'm glad you said that, because otherwise I was about to. I come to this role as probably one of the few people in this room who was deeply involved in the negotiations at ICPD and ICPD +5. So there's a risk I'll be too conservative in my rapporteur role. On the other hand, those of you who know me probably don't expect that sort of risk. This is challenging. The big challenge, especially in the context of Cairo, is the tension that was really strong in that meeting about macro-level concerns against individual-level concerns. The title of this conference, Enabling Choices, is to me absolutely key. I'd probably want to add providing opportunities and support, because just enabling choice. You do need environments that enable choice. You do need environments that are supportive. You do need environments which will help people to get out of disadvantage and so on. So I think some of the discussion that's gone on, it's interesting that much of the discussion from the platform here has stayed with the macro level issues, whereas much of the discussion from the floor has been concerned with individuals. Now, none of us are in any doubt that improving health is good for everyone. You know, it's good at the individual level, it's good at the societal level. No problem there. Similarly, education is good for individuals and good at the societal level. So I don't think in those domains there has to be so much tension, but, and I think it's a big but, and many people have raised sexual and reproductive health and rights. We're going to be looking at many of the issues on that tomorrow, so I don't want to deal with everything on that. But still, early childbearing, early arranged marriages, gender-based violence, all inhibit the ability of young people to complete their education. You know, they're not completely separable, is I think a key message that has been coming out. Wolfgang, I think, helpfully raised 4 questions. Not all have been addressed. He wasn't able to address them all. I think they have all been touched on from the interventions in this session. So, you know, is aging a threat? And by and large, the need for society to adapt to realities, to accept that enabling choice means people choose low fertility, means that with all the increase in life expectancy as well, societies will be aging, so we have to do something in response to that. Similarly, with migration, people make choices. You can alter the environment in which they make choices. With fertility, people make choices. You can alter the environment in which they make choices. If you do that in a way which is not coercive or discriminatory, then I don't have any problem with that. I don't think many people in the room would have problems with that. So, providing financial incentives for people to have children does seem to me a choice that societies could make. It changes the environment in which we make choices, and it may change the choices. Similarly, enabling work-life family balance that came up alters those choices, makes it easier for people to combine having a family with working and with enjoying their lives. So policies, it's not a no-no that policies should ever operate in these areas. Indeed, most people here want many policies that will constrain the bad things about sexual and reproductive rights and health. Is migration a threat or an opportunity? Well, to some extent, that depends whether it's in or out migration. Migration is usually selective. It's usually selective of highly educated people. So the losses for the country which has substantial out-migration can present real difficulties and problems. They're often usually also the young, dynamic people. Is fertility too low? Now there we get into the dangerous water that Cairo forbade us to talk about quite rightly. Setting targets for fertility is not what we should be doing, but having policies that would enable people to have children if they'd like to have children is not, in my view, a wrong thing to do. No one really touched upon the issues of growing inequality. There was some mentions of this, but within the Central and Eastern European countries, greater inequality, the inequalities in health between men and women, and the particularly large differences in Russia, and the policies to try to deal with that. A fifth question ought to be about employment. In terms of lifetime opportunities. People need opportunities from the cradle to the grave. It's not just about education, it is about investing in young children as well, and we've not heard anywhere near enough about that. It is about education. It's also about the nature of the curriculum, and many of the concerns about sexual and reproductive health and rights can be met by ensuring that the curriculum is correct in education. But then for young people, as is happening now, experience of long periods of unemployment, there's quite a lot of research in the UK that shows that that has lasting negative consequences right throughout their lives. It's sometimes called the scarring effects of unemployment. So in terms of enabling today's youth to make the best of their opportunities, they need the investment. They need, what I think in the context of Cairo was more a human development approach. Wolfgang, human resource base, others, human capital. If Amartya Sen was here, he'd be talking about human capabilities. We want to achieve similar things. We often label them, but the better equipped people are, the more likely they are to find employment. Sometimes we ask too much of governments to enable opportunities for entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs are often made, not born, I think. And, it's fine to provide an environment that does encourage that sort of thing, but in the end, it's remarkable individuals who become the really successful entrepreneurs. And very often, they've failed in the education system. Look at many of the big information technology companies. They're being founded by people who were unusual people, very dynamic people, but they did not fit into the conventional education. Now that says something's wrong with the education too. We've heard a lot about lifelong learning as well, right through the life course. There's been a common thread about the need to look at people across the life course, to look at intergenerational solidarity issues, and to deal with the fact that young people need help, older people need help, people in the working ages who are trying to combine family and living need help. We all need help. Rapporteurs need help, and are getting it. So what we haven't heard, we've heard some about health and social security needs. The challenges today have been pretty big, and stray beyond population is one of the challenges. Where do you stop? We've not heard a lot about pensions and changes in pension structures. Again, we have to move to environments where pension provision is less generous than it has been in those countries where it has been generous, and where people expect to retire later. Part of the, perhaps, Wolfgang's group's new dependency ratio, we ought to be looking at retirement ages in the context of when people have 15 years further to live. But then perhaps we should be thinking about the fact that the better off, the better educated in unequal societies actually live a heck of a lot longer. They're choosing to work longer because they enjoy their jobs more. But on the other hand, if we say they're not allowed to retire until they're 15 years from death, whereas the factory worker who would die a lot earlier would be allowed to retire, will cause some interesting policy debates. We need to look at men and women. We need to look at people right across the life course. We need human development in the broad sense. We need to remember that Cairo and Cairo +5 emphasized education as one of the elements, emphasized the needs for human development across the life course, but we're all conscious that there is a need today to reiterate many of those needs and many of the other things identified in the Cairo agenda because they have not happened. Also, we're nearly 20 years on. new issues ought to have emerged. We shouldn't just be locked in ensuring further progress on things that were agreed in Cairo or Cairo +5. We should be considering new issues. Some of those will certainly come up again tomorrow morning about strengthening access to safe abortion and about sexual orientation and sexual rights, but I don't think they are part of today's discussion. That's about the best I can do.
Thank you very, very much for this. It was wonderful, the best you could do. Thank you very much for this brilliant wrap-up in a nutshell of our first thematic session. And it's just up to me now to pass the floor to the Vice President of our conference, to Mr. Alexei Povchenko, and ask him to conclude the first day.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say and to ask everybody one more time just to say thanks for the brilliant moderator of this session, Ms. Petra Bayer. It was actually the session was really interesting and substantially interesting. So as for the day, I'm not going to make any other conclusions because the professor has already done that. I would just like to, on behalf of the chair of our conference as well, thanks all the countries for their inputs, for their questions, and appreciate that very much because it's always very fruitful day for all of us. Thanks to the countries and for the participants, to the NGOs and the youth organizations who participated today. So on these words, I would like to say that our today's conference day has finished. Thank you very much for everybody again. And there's one more thing I would like to say, that every participant is kindly invited by our chair for the reception, which will take place at the UN restaurant on the 8th floor and will start at 6 p.m. So everybody's invited, as it was said. And thank you very much one more time for your all good participation during this day. So the day is over. Thank you.